going to be the importance of. Should I restart? Let me restart. So for this, welcome everyone to the first French/English meetup of the UiPath French community with the subject of the importance of solution architecture in automation. Could you have the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll let the hand to Hiba.
Hi, everyone. Welcome everyone to our very first event hosted in English. So just quickly to introduce the UiPath community. So UiPath is a company that suggests the end-to-end automation strategy, and UiPath community are people like you, like me, people that are eager to use everyday UiPath world and techniques and products. So if you're a member of UiPath community, you've already heard of Academy. You might also have used Forum to check answers, to answer even questions, or maybe you've been already to community events like the one that we're hosting today. So join the community if you are not already in it, and let's go ahead. If we could go to the next slide, please. We'll focus a little bit on the UiPath community that is hosting you today. It's the Paris chapter in France. So we're up to 10 to 15 people that are working, organizing the events. So you could see them. As we said, it's our very first English session in 2023, but also in 2022. So yeah, we're trying to switch a little bit to English, but maybe our events are in French. If you want to subscribe to our events, just go ahead. I'll put the link to the website and you can just click on subscribe and that's it. If we go to the next slide, it shows you like technically how we can do this. And I'll put also on the chat the LinkedIn links if you want to share your experience with us, or if you want to let us know something. So thank you very much. It was Hiba Beldi from the Paris chapter.
Thank you, Hiba. So let's get to the main subject, which is our agenda. We have quite a packed schedule for today. First of all, we're going to kick things off with an introduction, a little presentation about the different people that's going to be presenting this meetup, an opening session about the solution architect, the roles, the importance, the requirements, and the stakeholder and the engagement that we will have for this solution implementation, as well as the role of the REF framework in this solution design, and a hands-on session at the end. If you could have the next slide. So let's start off with a little presentation about the different speakers. I have with me here someone that doesn't really require any presentation, as he is quite known throughout the community, known for his knowledge, his sharing, and his different titles, and his engagement, of course. And I'll let you, Lahiru, present yourself to our spectators.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So this is me, Lahiru, and thank you very much for inviting me for this event. So I am actually located in Sri Lanka, Colombo, and I work as a RPA lead for the Boundaryless group, and I mostly take care of the document understanding AI related stuff in the company. So that's me in very, very high level.
Yeah, that's a very high level. He's quite a modest person. He is the most active person that I know on the community and as well as on the forum. So you know him one way or another if you have been working with your past community. And really thank you again for this meetup and your knowledge sharing on this subject. So I'm Abdelaziz Zaiter, RPA consultant for Capgemini and UiPath MVP 2022. So let's get to the next slide. So what is solution architect? What are the macro view of this question? If you could have some input on that, Lahiru.
Yes, yeah, cool. So before we really get into the solution architect, just first say like, what is a solution and why we need a solution? So basically, we all are working in the software industry, and we work with a lot of clients, and we work on various different projects. So basically, all of them have different requirements, different problems that they try to address with different technologies or different methods of getting those resolved. And for that, we as consultants, we as solution architects, what we provide is a working solution for them. So that is something like, we are not trying to replace anyone. It's just about introducing a solution or a software or even an automated process that can be handled and that can support their problem and get it resolved. So that is kind of a solution. But there is also a word architecture. So what is architect? And what does that do? So basically, this is where I'll explain it in this way. So we all know how we design buildings and all this stuff. So there is an architect who really designs a building based on the person who needs that building. He has a specific requirement in his mind, right? He wants to have his house in a specific way, and based on what he says, this guy designs the house. It's not just by looking at another house, but just by understanding what he needs. And this is an architect for all these buildings, but it's kind of the same concept applied here. So we also look at problems that all our clients have. We try to understand their requirement. We try to figure out how to solve their problem and by addressing all their requirements. And then we apply the same concept by designing a software solution to address that. So that's where this solution architect comes into picture. And here also we do the same thing. So we design a solution that can be scalable, that can be easily managed and used for a longer time. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so basically gathering all the different information to better know what you're handling, correct?
Yes, exactly.
So much like you said with an infrastructure, like in buildings, you need to know what you want before even starting off the construction, as well as a clear view of the different requirements, as well as issues, and if any, pain points, so that you can take them into account even before starting off this building itself, correct?
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, maybe we can deep dive in the next slide about these different aspects of the solution architect. Okay, so these are, like you just said previously, you're gonna have like small boxes to tick and to fill before even going any further within your development itself or in the construction or whatever. So if we could have like these little bits with some input, if you could, Lahiru.
Yeah. So when it comes to RPA projects, all these are different stages of a project. So initially, we do this requirement gathering. We try to understand their business problem, their pain points. Along with that, before providing a solution, we also need to understand the infrastructure because that's where the solution is going to be at the end. So one of the first things the solution architect does, along with understanding the process, is also understanding their current infrastructure setup and see how a solution can be fit into their environment. They might already have RPA processes in their environment. They might already have UiPath installed or a cloud version. So whatever it is, we just need to understand what it is, and if not, how we can implement that, and then decide what kind of features we need to address that specific problem they have. So that's just one part of the technical side. But then on the other side, we also need to understand their business process. So that is usually done along with the business analyst. So a solution architect is a technical guy. he might not understand all the business related things in the process. So a business analyst and a solution architect always work together with the business team, try to understand their pain points. And then this is where we already create these PDDs, solution design documents, and all this stuff. So in that exact moment, usually a BA and a solution architect get into a lot of discussions on how to best provide a solution for their requirements. And then, so I'll tell you one example. In my previous company, it happens in the current company as well. So whenever we get into this kind of requirement gathering sessions, at the end of each session, when I'm the solution architect for those projects, I connect with the business analyst and we try to understand. We go through our notes, try to figure out what we understood. Because a business analyst, he might understand things in a bit of a different way than I do. And I might think from the technical point of view, whereas he is thinking from the business point of view. So we discuss all these points that we understood and then try to map it together. And I might have missed some points, he might have missed some points. We capture all that and then we try to come up with the areas that we don't understand or we lack information. And we try to map all those things in a kind of like a diagram so we can understand the flow from start to end, what happens. So this is going to be in very detail. So each and every step is kind of recorded on a diagram. And that way, we are able to understand what are the areas that we don't properly understand or we don't have much information. And that way we can do follow-up meetings with the business team, try to figure out what happens in those specific areas. And that way we can also validate what we understood because we have it in a diagram and we can easily explain it to them and a diagram can be easily understood. So all this is done along with this RE framework. So we'll get to that a little later, but just remember RE framework plays a major role here. So along with that, the PDD, the design document, development estimates, we do all of this stuff during the design. And once that is signed off, then a solution architect's role is to not really get into development, but to support the developers, the team, with his design, because he's the guy who understands the overall process and he has the whole design in his mind. So he needs to put it in a way and distribute it to the developers in a way where they can build what he has in his mind. So this is like breaking this into smaller components and distributing it to the team so they can build what he has in mind. And at the end, we have the full solution. So when it comes to building, it's not just development. So the architect will help get it developed. And along with that, he will do code reviews. He will try to understand whether that meets the standards, the development standards, the best practices, the logging and source control stuff. He will be monitoring all of those stuff throughout this process. And then later, when it comes to testing, it's again, architect plays a major role there. He will be looking into these test cases to see whether it's successful, what is failing, whether it meets the business users' expectations, and handle things accordingly. Not only that, you all know when it comes to development, it's just not that we get all the requirements at the beginning and we just do a smooth development. That does not happen like that. We always come up with new things, changes, and all this stuff. So again, architect plays a role there because whenever there's a change, we might need to do some changes in the solution. Again, I'll tell you one example. There was a project where we worked on. We did the initial requirement gathering. We had so many discussions. We came up with a diagram that was approved by the business, and then we started development. we were like halfway through, or pretty much everything is done. But on one specific day, a guy came and he said, "This is not what I want." Then we were asking, "You guys were giving us these requirements, so why are you saying this is not what you need?" He said, this lacks a major part of the requirement. And he was explaining this whole thing. So basically, after that, we understood that whatever we were developing is just a waste. And we had to redesign the whole thing. So basically, it was not the developer's fault, or it was not the architect's fault. They approved the solution, but somehow this guy was not a part of the conversation at the beginning. So we didn't know even that guy existed at the time. And he came up after some time. So basically, we had a discussion, and at some point we decided, okay, let's start it from the beginning. And we had to redesign. So these are things that happen. And this was the worst case because we had to redesign the whole thing somewhere in the middle. But likewise, there are times where they come up with slight changes and things that we need to address time to time. So that's where a solution architect is really needed. And finally, when everything is ready and when everything is deployed, it's just about monitoring and ensure that it's running smoothly, whether it's efficient, and providing support time to time to improve the solution. And yeah, so that's a role of a solution architect throughout this entire life cycle. So I did not like explain all of these things because some of the things are kind of straightforward. But generally, these are the things an architect could do throughout this project.
Okay, I just have a question for you, Lahiru. A solution architect, I see that there are lots of things inside this role, and it's almost like a full-time work, full contract. And the question is, do you happen to have solution architects that are also switching to developers in other projects, or is it like more people are fully solution architects?
Well, I have seen that happening because I have seen at a time a guy as a solution architect, and in another project he's a developer. And sometimes in the same project he's the architect, he's the developer, he's the business analyst, he plays all the roles. So I have seen that happening. But I really don't recommend a solution architect to get into development because when you get into development, you lose that overall picture. Because once you come out of that development, then only you see how all these things are connected and how when new things come up, what to do and all this stuff. So that has to have that proper mindset, and you should not really get into development stuff. But still, I have seen that.
Okay, thanks.
So basically, a solution architect is going to be laying off the groundwork at first. It's like maybe planning and so on. But as you just mentioned, the business analyst and a solution architect should be working all together, both at the the information gathering, as well as preparing the overall process itself during the life cycle, as well as in the testing. But all of this has to happen before even starting the development, as it's crucial to get what is expected in order not to be in the case that you just explained, where you'd have to start all over again. So that you actually need the validation points even before you start the development, correct?
Yes, yeah. So the most of the involvement is actually needed before the development.
Exactly.
Because that's where we try to understand everything. And then when it comes to development, it's just about making sure whatever that's needed to be done is done, and the output generated by the team is what they expect.
Exactly. So basically keeping that general view of the project itself, so where it started, where it's supposed to be, and where it's supposed to land, and then actually being called every now and so on during this life cycle to validate, to sign off on different documents, as well as approve on the validation points that you agreed upon even before the development section. So this is the role, or at least the different stages on which this solution architect should be implicated and should have his input. But do we have even, if we could switch to the other slide and go through the importance of this solution design and the different, let's put it, challenges, as well as different stages that you could go through in order to have something that is both presentable and according to what the requirements of the client, because after all, we're working all of this for a client that is compliant to what he is, to comply to his first demand, sorry.
Yeah. Cool. So on this, I'll also share another example. I like sharing use cases, so then rather than just explaining stuff, it's also, we talk about the real life things that happens. So again, there was another project we were working on for a client. So what happened was they already had an automation solution for their particular process, and it was running. But at some point, they wanted to introduce few more features to that, and they also had a bunch of enhancements to be done, like extra requirements which they wanted to cover. So that's where we were introduced to the project team. So what happened there was we understood the process. We went through the requirements. We tried to understand what they need. And then we started looking at what they already had. So they had a solution built on UiPath. It was an unattended process. So this process was already complicated. It's a very complex process. And for us to add those new requirements and the enhancements they're requesting, we had to really figure out whether it is feasible in the current solution, which they already had. So again, this company is from oil and gas industry, and it was done for a very complex business process. So what we did is, so we had the requirement ready, we had the documentation, everything. Once we look at the code, what they already have, we realized that it's not possible to implement some of those enhancements and some of those changes they want to do, because the way it is built, it was really impossible to do anything, because it is a big process, and all that is done built inside one single solution process, I mean. So it's very difficult to add anything, remove anything, because it breaks a lot of things. So what we did is we had an estimate at the beginning given to us by the client, and we had to go back and tell them that this is not possible. We can't use your existing solution. We had to redesign this whole thing from scratch. It was like shocking, because they did not expect anyone to come back and tell that kind of a thing as a solution. But it was the case. So they also had a RPA team internally. So we all got together, analyzed what this is and why we can't do it. And then finally, we all realized that it's impossible. And from their side, they really need those enhancements. And we had to redesign the whole process from the beginning, from scratch, and start working on it. So earlier, they had only one big process connecting all of these requirements, but at the end of this redesign, and once we developed it, we basically had about 15 connecting processes. When I say process, it's the process that you see in the orchestrator and the process list. So yeah, so each triggering another and like this. So that is how complex it is. So I'm trying to relate this to the points that we have here on the slide. It's so basically, if we had a proper design, we could have easily avoided those reverb stuff. We could have easily scaled it up and used it in other areas. If we had reusable components, we could have easily used those. So this is why a solution, a proper solution design is very important. Is when we develop, it's not just about designing one solution or one process. We have to have that proper design in place, because it's not just a one-time thing. At some point, there will always be changes coming, and we have to make sure the solution design will support all those future things as well. So yeah.
So what you're saying is actions and consequences, correct?
Yes.
So basically, the solution architect is going to be preparing those actions in order to reduce most of the consequences that you just listed, which are again costs, time, and time is cost. And everything you have to prepare before needs to be both approved and signed off. Sorry, so approved is signed off, to be approved and to be followed upon for different tasks in order to reduce the consequences. And
Yeah.
what would you say is the best approach for this? Even though if we follow up all the different steps that we just have seen in the past slides, and you go at it and you say, okay, now that I have everything that I have, every information that I require, how can I go on from this? And which is going to be the subject of our next slide.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah.
Hello, I have a question here.
Yes.
Hello, hi Lahiru. So just for the purpose of solution architect, okay, whenever we are building solutions in terms of how the automations would be scalable and robust. So what do you say about the testing strategy of those XAML files or workflows? So should that also be planned in advance? And if yes, how that should be done? Thank you.
Yes. It's a good question. So yes, it has to be planned in a way, because again, if you go back to slides, in this stage when you're designing, we also need to come up with a plan to test it. So I'll get to that once we get into this technical thing. I have something planned for you. But yes, so the way we design the solution, it should be supported to test it properly. And so I think this is happening in the next slide. So I will get to that in a short while.
Sure, thank you, Lahiru.
I want to ask. So, hi, this is Manazir. So I just want to know how you will be categorizing that work, that yes, it is a simple or a complex one. Is there any parameter that will define? Because that will really strategize in our prioritizing work.
Yes. Yeah. So when it comes to the requirement gathering session, we can understand the complexity of the process based on few things, like whether the data is structured. I'm just giving you a few examples, like whether the data is structured, how the data is stored, where it is stored, and when it comes to the business rules, what kind of business rules we need to take, whether it is just yes, no kind of a thing, or whether it's just complicated than that, and what parameters are used to take those business decisions. Is it someone just by experience doing it, or do we have any data to decide that this is what we need to do, for example? And then
do we have any model or a structure that we can categorize it by saying, okay, this is having 10 links, 10 drop downs, 10 text boxes, so it is a simple one, or it is having 20 pages, means 20 screens, 20 different functions, interaction with multiple applications. So do we have any stencil like that? So depending on that, we can categorize the complexity.
Yeah. Yes, there is. So different companies use different approaches again, and some companies have their own parameters and structure to do this. But the easiest one is, if you go to the UiPath Academy, if you go to the business analyst course, in that you can actually download some of those things. There is an Excel file that you can use. It's kind of it gives you a structure where you can, while you do the requirement gathering, you can answer those questions, like how the data looks like, what kind of applications you use, how you access these applications, like whether it's a web, desktop, or a VM, whatever it is, and about these business rules and stuff. And by doing that, it kind of gives you a figure saying whether it's a complex process or there's a basic one, and what's the automation potential. That's also part of the requirement, because we cannot just go and automate every single thing. So we need to understand whether it's possible to automate, and if not, how we can maybe we can improve the process by doing some lean standardization stuff or something else. Maybe a different software system can address their problem. Who knows? So
Right.
yes, the easiest thing is you can find it from the academy, the business analyst course. It's there. You can download and try use.
Okay, fine. And next thing is also related depending on this complexity. So depending on these things, we will be estimating that this much amount of hours that will be required. So for that also, do we have any methodology specifically for UiPath?
Yeah. And again, well, sometimes it depends on the architect. Sometimes it depends on the company. But I'll tell you what I usually do. And this also relates to the next slide. So what I usually do is I kind of breaks down this whole thing into smaller components. I'll show you how that is done. And
Fine.
based on that, I give an estimate for each and every small component. I'm not estimating the whole thing at once. I'll estimate the smaller things. And at the end, you get the total. This is your estimation. And I kind of realized that for me, it works. So I think you can also try it out.
Fine. Thanks for your help. Thank you.
I'll explain that to you in the next slide.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Please.
Yes.
Thank you for your questions. So, most of these topics do happen to be quite often. So some of us do have those issues when we're first starting with UiPath, especially with this information gathering section as well as the estimation. We much of those have quite some answers in the academy, as Lahiru just mentioned, in the business analyst course. You will get these templates, as he mentioned as well, with different questions and different answers that you will have, both the number of screens as well as the estimation that you could have, depending on both the experience that you have for your developers and the number of developers that you will have. Those will be more of a business analyst role with association with the solution designer or the architect. Lahiru, as we just were saying, depending on the different information you've gathered, how could you start, or what is the best way to start this solution itself as a solution architect?
Yeah. Before getting into that, I'll just answer one thing, which I wanted to do on this slide. So these approaches, all these things that we discussed, again, we are working with different people, different clients, and things can happen. So we cannot really foolproof this concept that this will be like this all the time, but we can at least try our best by applying these things that we know and having a proper requirement gathering session, proper stakeholder understanding. Because as I explained before, we had a stakeholder engagement and a proper requirement gathering, but this guy came out of nowhere and saying this part is missing. We didn't even know that guy was there. So it happens. But still, we will do our best to capture that and properly understand their requirement, validate it with them time to time. And so that's why we have usual probably daily meetings, weekly meetings with the business team, so that we are always aligned with their thing and we know that we are delivering what they expect. Yeah, so that's where all of these things start. And it's very important to keep that communication open all the time, share what we do, understand what they need, and that resolves most of the times. Yes.
Thank you,
And
Larry.
then coming to your
now
next question.
we all know REF framework, and how can we actually associate these two, and what is the advantage that we will be having if we use this template for our development? And as a solution architect, what is the added bonus of using this approach?
Yes. So before answering, I'll just explain a bit about the RE framework for if there's anyone who have not gone through the RE framework yet. So this is the bit of an advanced thing even in the UiPath Academy. Once you complete the foundation course, the next one is the advanced course where you can see the RE framework. So usually a lot of people use this as a best practice when designing RPA solutions. But again, when it comes to companies, sometimes they use the customized version of this, but sometimes they use the as-is RE framework to build a solution. So, but most of the time, using the RE framework is a good option. So for the guys who are not very much familiar, RE framework has 4 different stages: initialization, second is get transaction data, third processing, the last one is ending. So what happens here is in the initialization component is where we put everything to start our process. Like, for example, opening applications, collecting data, maybe, for example, logging into an application, basically getting things ready to start your stuff. And then in get transaction data, we take each data item and then go into the process. So that's where the whole thing happens. So once you're in the process, you start doing everything that's needed to get that item processed. Maybe it's all about getting some record from an Excel file, doing some validations, entering that information in a system. So you can get it from the get transaction data, do all those validations and updating systems and everything in the process. And you keep on doing that until you reach the last step. And in the ending, that's where you clean up the environment so that once you're done with the stuff, you close everything, you log out, and your machine is ready to do something else. So this is the high level idea. I'm not getting into detail of the RE framework. So if someone is not familiar with this, again, you can refer to the UiPath Academy, the advanced RPA developer course, I think. You can learn a lot about the RE framework. Okay, and now answering your question. So basically, this, if you actually look at it, it has a nice 4-stage thing. You initialize things, you process it, and you finish it. And how you process is actually by taking one item at a time. It's kind of like a loop. So thinking of this, you can also think how you can push this data into another process. Like, for example, let's say in a folder in your computer, you have a list of files and you need to process all of those files separately. You need to, let's say, extract some information, update another system. So can you do that in one process? Yes, you can. But if you really think of it, you can break it into smaller parts. So that's where this dispatcher performer concept comes in, and that kind of aligns with the RE framework. So you can do one process just to collect the information you need. So it's all about identifying the new files that you can do in a separate process and use that data, because again, we are all dealing with data. Whatever the process you automate, whatever the data source is, whatever it is, it's all about data. So we just need to figure out how to simplify our process and put it in a smaller pieces. So once you collect the data, you already have it, and that data you can put it somewhere where another system can access it and do the next part. So collecting is one thing. And once you give that data to the other guy saying, here, this is my files, go ahead and process it. Then the other guy can take one by one and start processing it, or like extracting the data. That's it. So from each file, you're extracting some information. And again, you have another set of data. So what's next? Now you are using that data to update another system. So that's a totally different thing. And that system, you need to log in, you need to have its own validations, you need to do certain stuff, navigation, inserting that data. So it's a whole different process, but it still is a part of this whole thing. So this new data, you can again put it somewhere and say, hey, here is the data. Go ahead and use it and update your system. So what I'm trying to say is there are a few points when you're actually looking at a solution where you can do this handover between processes. So that's where we can actually break it into smaller processes. So you can use a database, you can use orchestrate a queue, you can use Excel files, you can use data services, anything. A way of transferring this data from one process to another. So that way, instead of building this whole thing in one big process, now you have a simple 3 processes. One is just focus about collecting data, nothing else. He doesn't know what happens after that. The other guy is just doing the extraction. Giving that to the next one, it does the upload. So it's very simple. Even when you need to update a small part, you don't need to worry that you will break something elsewhere because it's totally separate and it's easy for testing as well. So this is how you break a big process into smaller processes. Now to answer another question that I got in the previous slide, how can you test each and every small component? Now we have a way of breaking the process, but in that process, how can we break it down further into, that's where the workflow level comes in. That is also part of the solution design. So, and it's also part of the estimation as well, answering the other question. So there is another use case, I guess, in the next slide, which we can get into more detail. So,
Yes.
you have anything to add here?
No, thank you. It was very clear, actually. I don't know if someone else did have another question, maybe. Hiba?
Just go ahead. I think that it was more about the REF framework, because right now it's the standard REF framework, and I think that depending on the companies, we might even have a customized REF framework. For instance, if I talk for myself, I know that in the REF framework, we have 2 types. We have one that includes the dispatcher inside, another type of REF framework that we have separate in 2 codes, the dispatcher and performer. And also inside the REF framework, we decided to not use anymore the config file locally because we're using our orchestrator. So we take the config file from storage bucket. So we have like slightly differences like this. The plan is to be able to parallelize the REF framework. So it's not really a question, but just a remark.
That's each company's customization, I guess, and its requirements and its needs. Maybe if we could take like the example that you mentioned, Lahiru, and deep dive in it, maybe it will be more self-explanatory on how we could implement or at least start the role of a solution architect. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this is a small use case. Again, this is also a good use case that which I have seen, and this is where I saw this RE framework really helped a lot. So basically, I'll explain you the process. So at the start, they have 3 different systems, totally different systems. All they need to do is just go there and download some information from all three systems separately. And once you have that data, they need to do some consolidation on all those files. So it's just assume that those are 3 Excel files that you're downloading. So you read each file, consolidate the data, do some applying some rules and doing some stuff, and you generate another big file based on all that, a single file. And then what we need to do is, so let's say these are like different transactions that are related to different vendors. So then what we have to do is we need to identify the different vendors and split these into a smaller set of files, because we need to email them to these vendors and get some information clarified. So the next part is getting each and every vendor, attaching these files in the email and sending out, requesting them to submit the response. So sometimes they don't ever respond. Sometimes they respond with wrong information, and sometimes it's just correct. So depending on how it is, if it's just correct information, you need to go ahead and update the subsystem. Else, if there are some issues, you need to reply them saying this information is wrong, please submit the correct info. And if they don't respond, there is a time limit for all these things. So if that time limit exceeds, you need to escalate that to a different team, and they will take care of that from there. So this was the whole process, but it's complicated because there are a lot of things involved. You need to send emails, you need to get data, you need to respond to these emails, process it, and all that. So I just put this into a smaller diagram. Let me try to find it. If I'm to show you, this is in high level, this is how it will look. So you download the raw data, filter each raw file, get the information, and save those files based on the vendor. Then you send out emails. Based on the reply, you either update internal systems or escalate it to different people. So that's how it is. So this is in very high level, but now as a solution architect, so you basically understood the whole process. But when it comes to automation, we also need to understand each and every detail, what they do in all these 3 systems, how you download the file, what are the steps. And once you have the file, what you do with it, how you create that final file, and all this information. So all of those things, this is what I usually do. I put all those things into a very detailed diagram. So I don't have that kind of a detail here because this is just an example for you, but just assume that each box represents an action that happens. So you log into a system, you do certain stuff there, and finally you save it somewhere, save the file. You log into the second system, do something else, download the file, save it. Same goes for the third one. So these systems don't have any interaction. They don't depend on each other. So you can do it parallel. So these are things, little things that you need to capture while you do the requirement gathering. Because sometimes it might be you need to do it in a sequential order, or you can do it parallelly. It depends. So capture all that information and put that in a diagram. So just by looking at it, you see, okay, so this is something you can do parallel. And then once you have that information, what you do with it? So you have 3 files, and you read each file, you do something, and you create another set of files based on the vendor. And now once you have the files, the next step is sending out emails. So now what you need to do? So we need to send these emails to each vendor. So our primary data here is the vendor. So we get the vendor list, figure out whether we have some information to send. Yes, we attach that, we create the email, and for each vendor, we start sending emails. And this is where all that other stuff happens. So first part is done. You have sent the email. Now it's all about waiting for the response. So once you have the response, we don't know who replies first or what will happen. So based on the response, we read the data in the email, we apply certain rules, try to figure out whether that information is valid. If it is not valid, we send it back. If yes, there is another process. You just need to insert that into SAP, let's say. But if not, you escalate to, again, if the time exceeds and if there are other things, you kind of escalate. So what I usually do is I kind of draw a diagram like this that captures every single thing. So it's very detailed. And it's a very big diagram as well, but it has everything. And once you have that diagram, you can easily validate this with the business team as well, because you have the full detail. And even if something is missing, you can easily figure out while you're drawing this, because you draw it based on your requirement that you noted down during the session. And if you missed anything or if you don't understand anything, you can easily identify that once you put it into a diagram. And you can clarify those and you can also validate. So now, once you have that info, how can you figure out how to break this into smaller processes? So now this is the big picture. Now, earlier I told you break it into smaller processes. How can you do that? That's where you need to identify these points where you can transfer data from one part to another. So let's assume this first one. This is one system that you log in, do something, download the file. So once you have the file, here you read it and do something. So you kind of see that this guy works on the data available in the Excel. And if you don't have the Excel, this guy can't do anything. Likewise, it applies to this thing and the third system. And through the requirement gathering, we figured out these are three independent systems that does not relate anyhow. So do we need to put all three in one process? No. We can easily break it into three processes. So let's say, let me try to go. This part can be one RE framework. And sometimes the RE framework might not have repeating stuff. Like probably in this case, you just need to log in and download the file. But still, in some companies, you have this standard. In our company, we always use the RE framework, for example, whether it's sequential or whether it's repetitive or whatever, because it has a lot of controls in it for exception handling. So considering that, you can break this as one RE framework. And this again, another RE. Same goes here. I'm not very good in drawing circles, so bear with me for that. So this could be three different processes. And now here we have three files. And all we need to do is just based on the different vendors, we need to create another set of files. So this could be another small part. So we have files. We read through each and every file, consolidate it, do all these rule applications or whatever that's needed, and create the next set of files. And in there, you kind of have the repetitive stuff as well. And again, once you have that file, now it's about mailing. So mailing cannot happen without the files. So this could be another part where you can break it. You don't need to put mailing inside this. You might think, what's wrong in doing it? But if you actually break it here, it makes the process simple. And in case you want to do anything here, you won't break anything down here. And this could be another one, starting from here. For each vendor, you send out the email. Because once you send the email, now it's all about waiting for the response. So do I need to have it inside here? No. That could be a totally separate process, just looking at your mailbox and processing each and every email that you get. You might get 10 emails at a single time, you might just have one, or you might not have anything at all. So identifying whether there's a new email, reading that, based on the data, doing whatever the rule application, and checking this validation, doing the action. This could be one. And if you are supposed to update the subsystem, I don't need to do it here, because this is just about handling the emails. So you can easily pass that validated information, maybe through a queue or through a database or Excel or whatever, put it somewhere else, and you can have another process here. Just looking at that, whenever there's new data, you can process it separately. Same way, when you're doing the escalation, you can put it somewhere else, and they can, if there's a separate process to handle the escalations, yes, you can use that there. So this is how I usually do it. So I always look for these points where you can break it into smaller parts when it comes to the larger process. But once you identify these small things, then what I usually look at is how can I break it further into the smallest component, the workflow. And when you're designing the workflow, you also can think how you can distribute it to different people in your team to develop it. Like, for example, let's say you need to log into a system, do some navigation, download the file. A login can be one workflow. The next workflow can be checking the home screen and doing some navigation to get to some place. And saving the file could be another. So identify those small parts and break it into small components. And these could be your connecting workflows. And by doing that, you can also, just by looking at that detailed diagram, you can also figure out what are the arguments that goes in and comes out. This is very helpful for your developer, because he is looking at that diagram, and when he knows that this is what I need to develop, he, just by looking at the design, he knows what he needs to expect and what should go out. Again, I'll tell you one example for this. This is something that I screwed up in my journey at the very beginning in my RPA journey. So, and it was my first POC. So I like to share that experience. In that POC, it was just a small invoice processing thing. You had like four invoices, just 4 invoices, nothing more. You just had to extract few information and update an Oracle EBS system. That's all you have to do. But we have never done, at the time, we have never done any RPA project before. We just learned and got ourselves certified. This is like 3 years back in 2019. So with me, there was another guy in my team, and also another, basically 2 other guys. So we understood this process, and I didn't know all of these things that I'm telling you right now at the time. I was just learning. So we just drew a rough sketch And we decided, okay, you do the login, you do the navigation, you create the data extraction in Abby, and you just do the inserting stuff. So a guy took over the data extraction, he just extracted everything to Excel. The other guy, he thought this guy is giving the data from a SQL database. So he created a connector to a database, he created a database and he wrote it in that. And on the other side, whoever is doing this data inserting part, we also split that into between three of us. So I did the login, another guy did a navigation thing, and likewise. But we never ever talked about what you're giving out as a part of your workflow, because at some point we were creating this in three different machines. We did not have source control. At some point we had to integrate this into a solution. Right? So we were doing this for a couple of days, and when we started integrating, that was a total nightmare, because I thought that this was good to send out, and this guy thought this guy will send just whether the login successful or not, a kind of like a boolean, which I was not passing at all. And there were a lot of issues like that. So it was just the same purposes. We might have just like 10 workflows maybe, but we kind of ended up creating 50 different workflows, trying to figure out how to put this thing together. So that was my first POC experience, like 3 years back. And that's when I really learned this in the hard way, that this is something we really need to do during development. So yeah, just sharing part of the journey.
The importance of communication, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I've got like, I understand completely what the importance of communication, especially when you're dividing way too much and then you have to relate and to upload everything and integrate everything all in one. So if we could like have a better or more of a macro view of what are the different people, different titles and where they intervene. So as you just said, we had this diagram at first with a general point of view, so which will be mainly done with the business analyst and the functional team, on where they will be explicitly listing the different requirements and saying this is what the end process should look like. And when a solution architect intervenes, as you just mentioned, you just blew it up in all different components, detailing everything, each step. So how would you go at it if it was from scratch? So for instance, you and the business analyst just got just finished with the data gathering, and now you're going to be both creating the as is process itself diagram, and as well as blowing it up as to as many little pieces, and then distributing everything either for the development team or to realign with the functional team once you've actually finished most of the documentation, let's put it like this.
Yeah. And also, yes, so that's how we start. And also on top of that, once you have this diagram, as I explained before, just put it into a very detailed level. And once you have each and every component drawn like that way, you can do a couple of things. You can assign these things easily to developers, because as a part of that, you also kind of can create a high level document for each and every component, what you think in very high level. This is like this in the initial sketch of the whole solution. You can say what goes in, what comes out of each workflow, and that kind of relates to the other workflow. This way, just by looking at that document, you have the structure, you have the input arguments, you have the output argument. Things can change over time, but at least for the beginning, you have it, and you don't get into that confusion. One guy expecting something and you're sending something else.
Okay.
Also, to answer another question that someone asked earlier, how you estimate. This is the same place that also happens. So once you have this detailed diagram, you can do the estimation for each and every small box there. Like for example, if it's just the login screen, you don't need like a full day to just design a login screen. It could be like 1 hour, for example. So just by looking at it, you have seen the process. You have seen it, you have seen how it works. So you have the feel. This is how much time it will take. And once you have that estimation on top of each and every box, you can say, this is the overall estimation for this smaller component and for this specific process, and for the whole thing, you have this many days.
Okay, thanks. Lahiru, I have another question because I've seen like at least 2 questions that are exactly the same. So for instance, you've shown us the vendor management, management use case. I was wondering if you take it at a macro level, like at the whole project, how do you see people interacting with each other? So we understand the place of solution architect. So first, the business process owner has a problem, wants to automate something. So how do we add people after this? Like at which point the business analyst work, at which point the solution architect comes, at which point the developer, how do we see all these people in a project?
Okay, it's a good question. So basically, I would suggest the business analyst and the solution architect should be there from the very beginning, because it's all about understanding the process and also trying to provide a solution. So from the very beginning, these 2 guys has to be there, try to understand each and every component. And that's where you design it, because you will always have discussions between you to try to understand this. And then once you have the initial design, or somewhere in the middle of this, you can introduce your development team to that, because these are the real tech guys who does it, who creates it. So they might also have different opinions on this. It's like different ways of implementing stuff, right? Because, for example, you can do a API thing. You can also do UI automation, like things like that. So it's always good to have their opinion and fine tune your design according to that, and then start the development. So that's how I usually see it.
Okay, thanks.
You had a second question, Hiba?
No, it's fine. Just go ahead with the.
Okay. So I've got a question which I don't want to say involves high responsibility for the solution architect, but does the overall success of a process rely on his shoulders, or is it just his implementation?
Again, good question. So he's the guy who gives the solution. So yes, so there's a lot of responsibility in that, because he designs the thing, and that's why experience-wise, he's one of the most experienced guy in the team. So that experience really matters here. So yes, he has a lot of responsibility, and he also needs to support the team and guide them, because when it comes to the development team, you will have very senior people, you will also have junior people who are still learning, trying to understand. So they will always need your support. So you as a senior person, and also a solution architect is probably the team lead as well. So you have the responsibility to guide your team, support them, and make this whole thing a success. So he has a lot of responsibility, but again, it's a team effort. So everyone has to work together.
Okay, so high stakes, high responsibility.
Yeah.
I think we have a question.
So one question I need to ask. So if there are, for example, there are 5 possible solutions. So you will be optimizing that this will be the best solution, and you will be suggesting that this is the exact role, or solution architect, as the name suggests, you will just see for the solution and give to the team.
Well, yes. So you need to actually evaluate all those possibilities. So again, for some clients, maybe they already have UiPath, let's say, for example, and you do it on UiPath. But when you talk to some clients, they don't just look at one product, right? They always evaluate other stuff. So there can be possibility where other things can also provide a solution. So in that case, you also need to analyze or evaluate what other platforms can do. It has always been the case. And out of all that, you need to give the best solution, like cost-effective solution, and also what's the best thing that you can do. So yes, so if there are like 5 solutions, what's the best one? That's what we are going to tell them. Or else you can say, these are the 5 solutions you have identified, and this is your analysis for each and everything, and let them decide which one to go ahead. So it depends.
And did you ever came across any challenges that yes, this functionality is really difficult and we need to have some workaround? So any challenges you face till now? If you can share those.
There are some challenges like that, and this has been like that. So I can share one thing. So again, I can't remember that process, but yes, there was a process where the logics and everything was very dynamic. It's the document understanding process, I have to say, where you get documents from different types. A lot of things are unstructured, and the rules that you need to apply has to be very dynamic. So for those things, we had to evaluate multiple. We had to evaluate multiple vendors, including UiPath and few other things, and figure out what is the best for them, and thinking a bit about their future plans as well, because they had discussed with us about some future things they want to do, and deciding all those things and deciding the complexities, and especially around these business rules, we figured that in UiPath we can do it in a much more simplified way, and we took that into consideration because that kind of affected the overall estimation on when we are going to deliver. And it was a very urgent project as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Lahiru.
Thanks.
Thank you for your questions, Manzir, if I'm not mistaken. Unfortunately, we've exceeded the 1 hour meet. We're 14 minutes overdue. So as we mentioned in the comments, if you have any further questions, they will be we will be putting a link.
So just a little information because Chris has been writing it. So after this, because we see that you have like lots of questions, we'll open a threads on UiPath Forum, and so we will be able to answer all the questions. So thank you very much. We will copy paste all of your questions that we still did not answer to it, and we will answer it on UiPath Forum. It will be easier. Thank you for the suggestion, Chris.
We can also copy the questions and answers.
I'll request that please schedule similar type of sessions in future. These are very interactive, and at a glance we are getting the solution. So please keep on doing in future. Really need those.
Thank you, Lahiru, for this interesting subject.
Okay, Christina, you were saying something.
Yeah, I was saying that we can also copy like part of the conversation, principal questions and answer in the forum thread, so we can upload the text document so you have access to the whole conversation that happened here today. So you will have this content there. You will also have access to the recording and the presentation, of course, on the event link. You will receive a wrap-up email tomorrow, and in the following days, all the content will be uploaded on the event, and with the recording posted on YouTube tomorrow. So with the thread on the forum, you can continue the conversation there. And just to remember, if some of you know the answers, just please answer, because forum is not just about posting questions, it's also about helping and answering to your peers. So yeah, that's something we can do to keep this very dynamic conversation going.
Thank you, Christina. So I would like to especially thank the French community as well as Mr. Lahiru for your sharing your knowledge and taking the time to actually answer these questions, as well as presenting what is a solution architect overall. And thank you all for sitting down with us throughout this meet, and hope we could give you another session, maybe with a similar topic, or we could take another topic and discuss it all together. So thank you again, and see you next time. Do not forget to subscribe to the UiPath French community link, and you will be notified whenever we have any new events or meetups.
Sure.
See you
Thank
soon.
you, everyone.